Hi, everybody. I want to introduce Dan Terpstra. He is on the subcommittee of the Third Act Faith, the subcommittee on faithful banking. And he's going to talk to us today about a campaign that is called Banking on Our Future. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Sharon. It's good to be with you all this afternoon. Well, it's afternoon where I'm at. I'm in Tennessee right now. I guess it's lunchtime for you guys. So we've got a 3-hour time shift here. I'm going to share my screen, Sharon. So this is a presentation that I gave a couple weeks ago for the Presbyterians for Earth Care. There were 3 of us presenting about what older adults could do. And it seemed like this stuff was appropriate for me to share with you as well. So I just repurposed these slides a little bit to make them more context sensitive to the situation today. So probably the first thing is you don't know me at all. So I probably ought to at least spend a few minutes. Well, Sharon and I agreed on 30 seconds, but it's never going to be 30 seconds to introduce myself a little bit. I'm a Presbyterian. I've been a Presbyterian and a scientist pretty much my entire adult life, but I've only become a climate activist in the last decade or so, and it started with just about exactly 10 years ago when I decided to go for my first climate rally in Washington, D.C. This was Bill McKibben's Forward on Climate March, which at the time in 2013 was the biggest climate event in history in the U.S. Depending on who you listen to, there were 50,000 people or so that turned out on the Mall in Washington on a frigidly cold February day to gather and hear Bill talk. And standing next to Bill in that picture is Michael Bruni from the Sierra Club at the time. And I think that's, what's his name from the Hip Hop Caucus on the other side of him. But those guys together were sort of the keynotes of that rally. And it was kind of a transformative event for me. Afterwards, while I was waiting to warm up a bit before I got on the bus for the 10-hour drive back to Knoxville, Tennessee, I stopped in an Episcopal church near the mall.
To this first webinar in a series on climate change. Okay, let's pause.
Sorry. Sorry.
Are we okay?
Feedback going on here.
Okay. Oh, I'll mute everybody except for Dan. Go ahead, Dan.
So I went to this Episcopal church where they were doing a post-rally rally, I guess, and they had a bunch of breakout groups. One of them was on fossil fuel divestment. Bill McKibben had just finished his Do the Math tour. He'd been out in San Francisco and across the country in the late months of 2012 and finished up and did this rally. I had no idea what divestment was all about, but I went to the breakout and decided that I could probably do something there with my connections with the Presbyterian Church. So there we go. We started something called Fossil Free PCUSA in the Presbyterian Church. And I ended up as the moderator of that group nationally for the first couple of years of its existence. And we brought overtures to the Presbyterian General Assembly in 2014 and got defeated, in 2016 and got defeated, in 2018 and got defeated in spite of the fact that we had a die-in on the floor of the convention center. But each time we got defeated, we made a little bit more progress. In 2020, things got canceled. But finally, in 2022, the General Assembly voted to divest from 5 big fossil fuel companies. So, and we got the headlines in the National Catholic Reporter and felt like we were beginning to get some traction on that issue, but it's a long haul. And over the course of those years, I know that there's been many Methodists that have been involved in trying to make divestment happen within your structure too, which is different than the Presbyterian structure, but that effort continues. And our big thrust was to try to get what we call the categorical divestment from fossil fuels rather than just divesting from one company at a time. And I think that's the direction that the Methodists are trying to move in as well. So we've divested from these 5 big companies: ExxonMobil, Marathon, Phillips, Valero, and there was another one, Chevron should be in there too. We've got those 5 gone, and the question then becomes, what's next? Where else do we go to try to stop our dependence on fossil fuels? And the question comes up, what about the banks? This again, as Sharon mentioned earlier, Bill McKibben's got his fingers in a lot of these things. And this was the title of an article that he published in the New Yorker in 2019. Money is the oxygen on which the fire of global warming burns. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't read it, I recommend it to you. It's in the New Yorker. You can search on money, oxygen, Bill McKibben, and it'll pop up. It's worth reading because it establishes the dependence that the fossil fuel industry has on the banking industry. And that's sort of the basis for what I'm going to be talking about coming up here. The big question is, what do the banks have to do with it? It's fine to think about divesting from owning stock in fossil fuel companies, but most of what the fossil fuel companies are able to do in terms of their infrastructure and development is in terms of the dollars that the banks lend them to invest in that infrastructure. And we may not have shares of stock in fossil fuel companies as individuals or even as churches, but pretty much all of us have bank accounts, and we've got credit cards, and we've got home mortgages and car loans and other interactions with banks. And a few of those banks are very heavily invested in fossil fuel infrastructure. So if you look at this slide, you can see that we give our money to the bank and we get credit cards from the bank and use those credit cards. The bank then doesn't stick that money under a rock. It invests that money in a lot of different things, maybe local companies, maybe our own mortgages, but often a lot of it goes into pipelines and fracking and drilling for fossil fuels and mining, coal mining. All of those things together, for the average American, we think a lot about our carbon footprint and how the fossil fuel industry has worked very effectively at making us all feel responsible for this stuff through our carbon footprints. But just in terms of the money we have invested in the banking industry, all the carbon producing activities of the average American for 6 months is the equivalent of $62,000 invested. So for many of us, as we reach our third act in life and we've accumulated assets and have IRAs and have retirement funds and money in banks, that represents a significant carbon footprint. In fact, 70% of the assets of the boomers and the silent generation, we own 70% of the assets of our economy. That's a lot. That's a lot of responsibility that we have, but it's also a great opportunity for us to have some influence on the banking industry. We're their customers. We can act collectively to make them change their behaviors. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit more today. So how much money and which banks? Over the last 5 years or so, Rainforest Action Network has been publishing articles every year called Banking on Climate Chaos. The latest, I don't think they've come out with a 2023 report yet, but the latest report in 2022 reports on the banking activities through 2021. And this is a list of the top dozen dirty banks in terms of the amount of money they've invested in the fossil fuel infrastructure. This is since the Paris Agreement, since most of these banks said that they were going to work towards becoming net zero. And if you take a look at the list, the top 4 are all American banks. This is an international list, but the top 4 members of that list are American banks. Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. If you total that up, it's over $1 trillion invested in those 5 years since Paris in fossil fuel infrastructure. We can't get off of fossil fuels if the banking industry continues to invest in them to that level. I like to include number 12 on this list as well, Morgan Stanley. They're also a US bank, in part because they at the end of last year bought E-Trade, which was one of the first electronic internet-based stock trading companies that I've been using for my investments for probably more than 20 years. But now that Morgan Stanley owns them, I decided that I needed to move my money elsewhere. So I'm no longer using E-Trade because of their connection to Morgan Stanley. So that's basically who's investing. And the question becomes, what can we do? And one of the first things that we can do is to stop doing something, i.e. stop using those banks for our investments. So whether or not you've got an account at one of those 4 banks, you may very well have a credit card with one of those banks. That was the situation I found myself in. My very, very favorite credit card of all time was my Chase Sapphire card because it just worked for me. And now it's gone. Sorry to say, but there, in addition to that, a lot of the airline credit cards, a lot of the Amazon card is sponsored by Chase, I believe. So you've got to look beyond just what name is on the front of the card. You've also got to look a little deeper too. And if you've got cards through the banks, or excuse me, through the airlines or through Amazon or through some other agency, find out who issues that card, because it's often Chase or Citibank or one of these, the big 4. So it's easy to do something about it. Just stop doing what you're doing now in terms of banking with these banks. The pledge that Third Act suggests that you take is pretty simple. All the words for the pledge are right here on this slide. If those 4 banks still fund climate projects, climate destroying fossil fuel projects, by 3/21/23, which is this March, spring equinox, I pledge to close my account and cut up my credit card. If you're not banking with those banks, don't bank with those banks. That's pretty much the extent of it. You can find that pledge and sign up for it online at the link that's on the bottom of this slide, and I'll share these slides with Sharon. I think she's got a version of these slides, so she can share those with you so that you can find that page on the website if you want to sign up and join this movement. So Sharon talked a little bit about Third Act. It started a little over a year ago when Bill McKibben basically kicked it off, and we've been sort of trying to flesh it out ever since. I recruited Sharon sometime last year, I don't remember exactly when, to join the faith group. And we've been kind of trying to get the ball rolling faster and faster as we've gone through the year. Third Act has 2 major thrusts. One is protecting democracy through protecting voter rights, defending voter rights. They had a big influence in the Nevada elections in the Reno area. And then the other one is protecting the climate. And one way to do that is to hold the banks accountable through this pledge to cut up our credit cards. Third Act works through working groups, and there's basically 2 kinds of working groups. One is what's referred to as an affinity group, and Third Act Faith is an example of that. In fact, we were the first working group to form about 11 months ago, something like that. And we are an affinity group. So we attract people from all across the country to get involved in this. And the other form of groups are called either regional groups or location-based groups. And there's one in Sacramento, there's one in the Bay Area, I think there's one in the Los Angeles area. There's probably about a dozen regional groups across the country that you can get involved in. The regional groups are great for on-the-ground actions. So for this 3-2-1-2-3 day of action coming up in about 5 weeks, the local regional groups are great for getting engaged in marching and protesting and being out in front of banks and talking to bank managers and things like that. Third Act Faith as an affinity group, we're trying to put together actions that reinforce those activities and support what's going on with the other groups. The pictures on the slide here are from an action that took place in New York City, where the faith group was involved with Green Faith, another faith-based organization, to basically shut down BlackRock for a day, at least stand in their lobby and get in the way and make a little good trouble. The top right corner shows Pat Elmanrode, who's the one of the co-facilitators for the faith group, getting arrested for the first time in his life. So we're not necessarily advocating that you need to get arrested to get involved in this, but it can go as far as that. There's a lot of events already scheduled across the country. There's over 50 events that are on the Third Act webpage right now, and there's more popping up every day as far as things that are available in the local area. And as you can see, the Central California area is just loaded with activities right now. Sacramento has just really been very busy on getting things scheduled. So there's a lot of different ways that I'm sure Sharon can share with you about ways that you could participate and get involved. Not much happening in Tennessee where I'm from, so I have to work through affinity groups because there's no regional groups around here. Tennessee's pretty red. So 2 weeks ago, when I first gave this presentation, I took a look at the website to see who the partners were. This isn't just Third Act all by themselves, and this is what I found. Sierra Club's involved, Green Faith is involved, 350's involved. These are names of groups that you've heard before. But then this Monday, I got an email from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and they were talking about telling JP Morgan Chase to stop financing fossil fuel expansion. That sounded awfully familiar to me. So I dug a little deeper and went back to the Third Act page and discovered that the dozen or so organizations that were involved 3 weeks ago have turned into 30 some. And I looked again today. There's Union of Concerned Scientists, by the way, down in the corner there. They're on that list. Now it's up to 42. So there's more and more organizations that are joining in this effort. It's going to be a nationwide effort with a lot of different groups involved. And I'd love to see more faith groups on here, but there's already several. So this is turning into a pretty big deal. It'd be a great thing for everybody to get involved in. So I don't want to go a whole lot further with a lot of details here, but I do want to just kind of summarize some of the things, some of the steps that a group like yours could take. Take a look at your own banking. See if you're involved with these guys, these top 4 banks. Make steps to find a cleaner bank, to find a cleaner credit card. They're out there. The Third Act has a lot of resources available on their website about where you can go. Credit unions are a great place to go. And then take a look at your church's banking, your congregation's banking. Find out if they're with one of these dirty banks, and then start taking steps towards what it might look like to move away from that bank to another bank that's maybe doing some more positive investing of your money. If you've got a green team in your congregation, see if you can get them involved to pass the word among congregation members to sign up for the Banking on Our Future pledge, the pledge to cut up your credit cards and move your money. Sign the pledge yourself. Think about getting involved with a group like Third Act Sacramento or one of the other groups in the area about engaging with a bank manager in a respectful way to make them aware of what's going on and pass that up the chain. Keep in mind that if you show up with a clerical collar, that can make a huge difference in getting people to pay attention to you, including the media. So these are ways that you can really raise this issue up and make it an important issue. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that you should join Third Act Faith.